Again, thank you for making time for it. And now, Sonali, dubbed the Queen of European VC. Hello. How are you?
That's a terrible name that someone gave me, I don't know who, years ago, and I wish I could meet whoever said that.
Sifted, blame Sifted.
Oh, is that, okay, that's a conversation we can have over here, all right?
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm so glad you made time for it. And I know that you could be in Italy still, because you were just celebrating your 25th anniversary in Sicily.
Yes,
And
not my personal anniversary. That was my birthday, actually. No, I'm just joking.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. No, it was our Excel in Europe 25 anniversary. So we set up in 2000, clearly, when it really felt like, you know, the world was exploding and was our oyster, and let's say things didn't quite work out. I can't remember, Nazo, if you were around then. And then became a bit like the nuclear winter, where it was like watching paint dry right after that. For years, not a lot happened. And that's when we were hatched, you know, and we had the capital, but it was very, very rough times. And I remember, because I've been here 18 years at Excel, I was at a previous fund before that, but I remember the phenomena in the early 2000s of B2B and B2C, which was back to banking and back to consulting. Because, did you say that? I'm so sorry. Sorry, I came late.
What happens when you come in late?
Okay, I had, we remember the same thing. We didn't talk, yeah.
Well, I mean, I do remember Excel being one of the few firms to give money back during that time. And also, I want to sort of talk to you about the evolution of Excel, but I think around that time too, Jim Breyer, an early partner at Excel, had formed a partnership with KKR.
Yes.
So everyone was trying to sort of, figure out their way. I remember that well. So I want to talk to you a little bit about AI, of course. Everyone's so interested in AI, and Excel is in the news right now because it is reportedly very interested in Perplexity. So I'd love to talk to you about that. I just wonder, Excel does not have an investment in one of the major LLMs.
We do not.
Yeah. So did you have a chance to talk to OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral?
Very much. We spent some time looking at the foundational model layer, you know, like everybody else, as you can imagine. And I think we're very excited by what the category has created. And if you just look at the capabilities and, you know, the cost, I mean, you couldn't quite imagine that you'd be here, right, with the performance kind of more or less doubling every 6 months, and the cost of inference plummeting like this, that the capability is really expanding. But I think our view has always been that we feel very comfortable with the application layer as opposed to the infrastructure layer because of capital intensity. And I mean, as we've proven that, right, in terms of the requirements needed to scale these businesses, these really don't look really much like venture capital kind of companies. But that said, I think it's always been, from our perspective, you know, what are the really interesting unlocks on the application side, both on the consumer side, prosumer side, but also on the enterprise side. So that's really where we've always focused. And we always have, if you look at kind of our history around cloud and the SaaS, we've always been more on the application side.
And what do you think of Perplexity?
You know, I'm not very close to it. I do think one of the obvious conclusions, if you look at the really the usage of AI, is that ChatGPT is a consumer phenomena, right? I mean, clearly we know the tokens that the trillions of tokens that are being consumed by enterprises. It's very early days. We can talk about the use cases there, but I think one of the things that people forget is that actually it's consumers. It's like nearly, you know, 800 billion users, whatever the latest number is, who are using it more and more for almost everything you do. I don't know how much of your daily workflow has moved over to ChatGPT versus wherever it was, including Google. So I think kind of the power of how you think about using AI for what was search or in general kind of knowledge work is really interesting. And so there's a bunch of companies, and Perplexity would fit into that too.
I noticed that Excel had led around in Speak, which is a language learning platform that jumped from a $500 million valuation to a $1 billion valuation in just the last 6 months, happening across the board. Feels like we've seen this story before. I'm just wondering, do you think that AI startups are getting a little ahead of their skis? I mean, it's got to be so hard to be an investor in this moment when it comes to AI.
The dirty secret of our business is that we wait every single moment for a super cycle, and we're in the super cycle. You can't kind of control the excitement. I mean, the other dirty secret is that we make most of our money in kind of in the peak of a cycle, which we had in 21, and now we need to see that again. And so I think it's really hard to say whether people are getting too excited. I think the unlock that these applications are creating in terms of usage and behavior change is massive, and there's no reason why a lot of these businesses cannot be more powerful than the kind of 1.0 version, where either there's an incumbent, and that I think is a more tricky discussion, or you kind of create completely new kinds of behavior that wasn't possible before, where we're an investor in Synthesia, which I think is a really great example of where there wasn't a kind of an incumbent company, video generation used at the moment for learning and development within enterprises. So they have the model layer, but also they have the application layer. So that's a really great example of where we like the model layer, but we also like the specific application layer. And it's a de novo application. It's kind of how I think about what mobile was. It wasn't just a mobilized version of your website. You needed the DoorDash, you needed the Uber to really create the new use cases. And I think that's what we're seeing, which is why the dollars are so kind of coming so fast and furiously, because we're essentially just expanding TAMs at a rate that we've never seen. And this is a global phenomena, right? And we're not even talking about enterprise. This is kind of on the consumer side.
Yeah, the Synthesia CEO came to a StrictlyVC event in London last year. I was really, really impressed with him. On a personal level, how are you using AI?
Well, I think I am one of those folks who, my day begins and ends in ChatGPT. That's at a personal level. I think actually I'm very excited by the bio and health and medical capabilities of AI. We just closed an investment in a company called Phase V, which is in the clinical trial space, which really compounds and accelerates clinical trials at a lower cost by using AI. It's an Israeli company that just closed today. Is a kind of a great example. And the reason I bring that up is that I think from a kind of a medical perspective, you can do a lot with looking at scoring and medical reports and really trying to become, the owner of your own information, which, we're trying to do that at Monzo on the financial side, but I think health is such a fragmented, antiquated, misunderstood category, and us consumers, and I really think of us as a consumer first, we don't have control of our information. So kind of being able to aggregate it and understand it in a systematic way and collect it is one of the ways I use AI. And then, of course, we do use it around, kind of deal sourcing and intelligence addition. That's more on the work side. We're all trying to get a step ahead, but it's an AI race there too.
Data-driven. So I did want to ask you too about, just the sort of broader stance in the EU versus the states, and how you feel about the AI Act. If you feel that Europe is moving in the right direction, or if alternately you're worried that it's going to hamstring startups here.
Yeah, no, I think, Connie, that's really a great question. We can spend a lot of time talking about regulatory and kind of, where Europe's at, which is pretty interesting, just given kind of all the geopolitical reality that we're facing at the moment. I think, if you really just look at what's happened over the last few weeks and months around kind of the China and the US kind of debate, discussion, trade war, embargo, whatever you want to call it. And the reason these two countries can kind of do this face-off is because they have huge domestic markets. And if you just step back, the EU too has a huge domestic market, right? So if we were to be one kind of region, I mean, the power you could unleash, because we have the entrepreneurs, we have the schools, we have the ambition, we have the talent, we have the capital. So the power you could really, again, using the word unlock, would be so incredible. And I don't think we'd be having many of the conversations we have around tech in Europe. And I'm going to answer your question. And so I think there's a lot of recognition, especially now that kind of Europe's left to fend on its own in multiple ways, about the fact that we need to be self-sufficient, we need to be sovereign, and there's an effort around kind of the 28th regime, which I'm sure you know about, which is kind of taking away all of the idiosyncrasies around labor laws and corporate laws, from bankruptcy, just giving stock option plans, licensing regimes. It's very complex. And so I think there's a real opportunity to make sure that we go fast and address what we're capable of. The issue is that we are also faced with headwinds on regulation. I think there's real effort on this particular, and the AI summit in Paris, I don't know if you were there, kind of spoke to some of this. But at the same time, we do have the EU AI Act, which is kind of 7% or some very high number in terms of fines, depending on the risk levels for those who don't know kind of the detail of it. And I think that just creates yet another barrier for a company who has to sort of prove, depending on where they go. And by the way, medical is in the high risk, right? So reading an MRI, for example, would be in the high risk. Credit scoring is in the high risk, which is finance, which is a big part of the European kind of the fintech fabric, if you will. So it is, as an investor, we don't want to see regulation, and you don't want to see a different playing field from Europe and the US. Let's leave China aside at the moment. So there is these headwinds, but these tailwinds, and I think my hope is that people realize that we're not going to have many chances, and we need to figure this out. But I can't say that particular legislation, I understand why there are some elements of it, but I also think this is a crazy time that people need to iterate, they need to experiment, they need to try, and we shouldn't be leashed on this side of the pond, because we certainly have the talent to figure it out. I mean, look at, we have people like Jeffrey Hinton over here.
Sort of relatedly, you mentioned the tariffs, and I was wondering if you are at all concerned that, rising US tariffs are against Europe. I mean, of course, it's changing every day, but is also going to be sort of or potentially a forcing function for people to move to the US who might not have otherwise, or move production to the US?
Yeah, no, that's it's hard to know, right? It's we have this. It's like. The mood music is so different if you're talking about AI and the entrepreneurship and the exceptionalism around that, and then you talk about the macro and everything else, and it's like you're having two conversations. And I think on the AI side, the one thing I will say is that where Europe is a bit behind regulation aside, is the fact that we see a lot more propensity for customers to experiment with AI in the US. So you kind of have the infrastructure layers, you have the talent, you have the companies and the application, as well as you have the customers who are really kind of very open to buying and experimenting, having slush funds, spending money on these kind of speculative or early stage AI companies, and sort of that flywheel keeps going. And so I think that's one of the reasons why actually people will move less from a tariff perspective. So I'm speaking directly around the entrepreneurship and the AI side. I think on the tariff side, that's too macro. The good thing about being a startup and good thing about being a venture investor, we're very micro, like we live kind of day to day, when's the cash out, what's the next tech wave. So I think that's probably not what's a forcing function, but of course, I think kind of entrepreneurship is the real question, and where do you feel like you go faster? And there's a lot of reasons why people would want to stay here, and I think hopefully some would choose to stay here more. And we're seeing actually people moving back from the US because of what's happening. But then the AI side, I think, is moving people.
That's really interesting what you say about Americans experimenting more. And I wonder if that's just sort of because Americans are rampant consumers of everything, and or it's because, ChatGPT was sort of the big breakout and it's based in the Bay Area and it was a little bit more, in our faces, so to speak.
It's a flywheel, it's a virtuous cycle, it's just spinning, and it's spinning very fast. It's also concentrated. I mean, one of the reason it took us 25 years, and, we're still early in not just Excel, the European ecosystem, is simply because we're fragmented. I mean, I think, we've invested in 70 cities across Europe and Israel, 70 cities. So each city had its own sort of slope where it had to get to that flywheel where there was recycling of talent and capital and ambition. And if you think that really culture is kind of software of the mind, you needed that to happen across Europe. And right now that's happening at speed with a lot of capital thrown at it, with a lot of success thrown at it in the Valley in AI. And we're seeing this. We're seeing this in Zurich. We're seeing this in Munich, because you have a lot of the educational institutions there. We're seeing this, of course, in the UK with DeepMind, in Paris with FAIR. So we have the sort of centers. We don't have one place where it's all collecting. And of course, virtually, we all know what everybody else is doing, but you can't beat the power of one location.
Well, I wondered how that's going to impact the defense tech startups, too, that are bubbling up in Europe. I think it's exciting, and for obvious reasons, they are emerging, and there's more funding going to them. But it does seem like it's going to be a little bit tricky. Everybody favors their sort of, home team, local, their own suppliers. How do you think about defense tech investing in Europe? I know that Excel made a defense tech investment in LA, a company called Chaos Industries, a big bet, $145 million. How are you thinking about this market?
Yeah, so, as you just said, it kind of is, there's some obvious reasons why it's become an interesting area for investment, because in some sense, the battlefield is dominated by technology, right? Lighter, faster, cheaper, networked, autonomous, versus kind of exquisite and antiquated systems that it used to be. Also, there is real kind of, I would say, asymmetry in warfare or the battlefield. If you think about the fact that you have very cheap drones, but very expensive systems that are trying to kind of intercept them. And so you have to really change the math and the economics of the business. And then we also know where we are geopolitically, as we discussed. But also the real other opportunity is the fact that you have primes that were created a long, long time ago and sort of haven't really rethought their technology from first principles. It's kind of a cost-plus systems, almost kind of a remnant of the Cold War era. And these companies, I think in Europe alone, if you add up the market cap, is a few $100 billion or $100 billion plus of revenue. So there's a lot of dollars to take. All this said, yes, it is interesting, but it's very complicated. It's long sales cycles. You really have to be able to deal with very complex political and kind of military infrastructure, and also kind of the buying personas, if you will. So we're very early. We're just trying to learn. My view is that it's going to be hard to be European-wide in defense. So I think the opportunity is more can you create new primes, next-gen primes per country almost? That could be a way to look at it. So I think if you have to sort of underwrite why you may be interested in investing in this space, that's probably one of the opportunities. But yeah, I think it's not easy to think. I know that's not what the conversation is. It's also about sort of what does NATO do, what does kind of Europe do, and hopefully that happens. But I think it's still kind of country specific for the most part.
Interesting. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about sort of like obvious questions about just structural challenges facing the venture industry. Challenges and changes, I guess. It's a very different industry than when you started at Excel 18 years ago?
Yes, yeah. That's right.
So I had sat down with Kirsten Green of Forerunner Ventures back in San Francisco last month, a prominent consumer tech VC, and she's had a lot of exits, but none of them have been through a traditional IPO, which is really interesting. She's had lots of M&A, and now she's using the secondary market quite a bit, but she basically said, like, no options are off the table. So I'm wondering how your firm is thinking about it, because obviously you're in the same
Look, that's such a great question, right? It used to be that I think our average investment hold is about 11 years. You invested, for the companies that worked out, you took them public, you didn't sell at the IPO, you held, you got locked up, and then, you kind of distributed. And that went on for many decades, and that was the way our LPs made money, and so you go on. And the capital that's gone into private markets now is trillions, right? So if you just look at the wall of venture money that's coming in, and at the same time you look at the exit market, it's really quite closed. I mean, I know we had CoreWeave, partially because of what's happening with the kind of tariff volatility, and hopefully we're entering a new phase. But the truth is it's not been really predictable. And so I think TS just talked about this, but with the amount of capital, and by the way, we're still tiny in venture capital in terms from a global perspective, if you look at sovereign funds, et cetera, and you kind of go across Asia and the Middle East. And so I don't see the flow of capital to venture capital and growth equity reducing anytime soon, albeit, it is muted in terms of the exits and the return. I think there'll be a kind of shift in terms of which funds can raise capital and which can't. And at the same time, everyone's watching kind of AI and the new infrastructure, the new platforms, and waiting for kind of the wave. We know what's coming. We saw it with cloud and mobile, and so it's just a matter of time. So money's only going to kind of come in faster, which we just talked about. And so I think if you step right back, and if you can't predict the exit market, we don't quite know where regulation's going to go on antitrust, right? So we don't know what's going to be approved, what's not, and we know what the cost of kind of Lina Khan was to the venture industry, if you will. So if you don't have the M&A, which used to be kind of one way to recycle and keep going, the other was the IPO, then I think, kind of private markets and secondaries have to be a structured way for you to think about that journey over time. It's not easy because, we're early, we're the lead investor, we're the board member, so this is not something we actively have sort of explored. But of course, opportunistically, we know these are options. But when you have your lead investor, you typically are completely aligned, and that's sort of, reputation matters more than anything.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's really no stigma to it at all in the U.S. anymore, which is a pretty incredible shift considering, I guess, again, like dating back to the beginning of the firm.
I'm going to send my CEOs to you.
There were a couple interesting things. I was looking through your portfolio companies and just reading about them. And one thing that I thought was really fascinating, a company called Kry, K-R-Y, restructured its capital, so it converted preferred shares to common shares so that management wouldn't be sort of left out in the cold if it sells to another company. I thought that was so interesting. I've not seen that happen in the US. It very possibly has, and I just don't know about it. I think that's great because obviously preferred shares are not the friend of founders, and if they sell below the valuation, they don't get anything. Can you just talk a little bit about what happened in that situation and if that's happened in any other situation?
Look, it was literally the day job between 2001 and 2005 was kind of doing a version of that, right? Because it was the bubble, everyone raised too much, and then you needed to make sure the founders and the management teams were taken care of. And I think it's actually a really good example of the fact that we really need alignment in all stages of a company with the founder, and companies that were financed at 2021, which is sort of, this was one of the examples, clearly raised at too high prices, and a lot of companies have had down rounds, but you still have the capital in the preference stack. And so you got to think hard about kind of what is the next step for this company. Is it going to IPO? Is it going to be an M&A? And in this particular case, not to spend too much time on it, but we actually have very exciting consolidation opportunities. But you can't approach a target with a certain cap structure and a certain pref stack and sort of expect them to just understand it. So having kind of a clean story is super important to create shareholder value. So we were happy to give up some value and kind of step back, if you will, in order to step forward and align ourselves with our management team. And I think when you have sophisticated investors across the table, there's no conversation that you can't have, because everybody is doing mark to market. We all kind of know there's no liquidity until the end, right? So in these 11-year journeys, it really doesn't matter where things are priced at. We only make money at the end, and that's when we're really aligned and going to do the right thing.
Really interesting. Another company that I thought was interesting, and it seems like so many of the top firms were behind this company, Hopin, virtual events. I feel like it became the poster child, sort of rightly, for founders cashing out so early. I think the CEO made like $200 million at least in shares. Then the company, of course, didn't do so well. I don't know if it's out of business entirely, but anyway.
No, we actually sold it, got cash back. Yeah.
Okay. So again, you always have to kind of play the game on the field, but has that experience going through 2021, 2022, where that was just, founders were asking for money and getting it very early on, is that changing, or would you like to see that change? It feels like we're seeing the same thing in a lot of these AI companies, and I've talked to founders about it, and they say they can't even really keep their they can't keep from sort of helping their early employees. They're allowing their early employees to liquidate their shares fairly early on because it is a competitive advantage. If they don't do it, they're going to lose these critical employees. So anyway, I'm just wondering how you think about it, if you think it's like just as sort of extreme as it was a few years ago.
I think probably 21 was pretty extreme. I think people still have some of the lessons of 21 as they approach sort of the current AI hype. The other thing I'll say is that a lot of the AI companies getting funded and getting sort of super funded, if you will, have very serious revenue traction, right? So there's sort of explicit enterprise value. So a lot of these companies don't have a lot of people. And model and kind of the frontier labs aside, but the actual application layer, people are doing magical things with a very small number of people. So you really feel like the company sort of has a certain value, if you will. You can, especially when it talk. It's not a valuation thing. It's kind of what's the capital that's already gone, and it's not so much in a number of these companies. So I think we created a lot of unhealthy habits during kind of the pandemic ZERP era, which we're all very aware of. And I think people were throwing money at companies, and the only way you could actually get into companies was doing secondary, because there was a lot of the businesses didn't need the capital at the time, right? So. And I think those were more kind of, I'll do whatever I can to get in tactics that you were just talking about. I think today what's happening is just the fact that people want to make sure that they're staying competitive, as you said, and not kind of, trying not to have a journeyman where people just kind of hop from one company to the other, because the AI talent is so concentrated. And it's just one of the tools to retain people. So I really don't see it as the same thing. Retention of employees, crystallizing value, make sure you're structuring your 409A properly is sort of kind of par for the course when you have a limited employee base you can hire in the AI world. I think over here it was just sort of a rampant, every company was painted with the paint, kind of painted with this COVID will go on forever and this curve will never stop, paintbrush. So I think it's quite different.
It's interesting. I have definitely seen a lot of talent flow out of OpenAI for that reason. I think everyone's sort of done well, and then they go on and start their own company. Guys, are you open to a couple questions?
Sure, of course.
I could ask you more, but I wanted to give people a chance if they have anything. And I should have let you know when I started this that I would be opening for questions. Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering how you stay learning in an industry that's constantly changing. So like venture capital, there's like one trend, one hype. How do you almost stay abreast and just learn what you need to stay ahead of the curve?
It's such a great question. That's another facet of the question around ChatGPT. Before I literally used to go to, in the early 2000s, I would go to like Gartner conferences or like deep cyber conferences and pull out all the like pamphlets and kind of, really try to read because the information wasn't there. And now you just open, ChatGPT and, but more seriously, I think, you do, I think one of we have two founders at Excel who are actually with us for our 25th celebration in Sicily last week, which is incredible. They're both in their early 80s, and they're both sort of active in their own way. One of them still does seed deals. I'm like, really? And he always says that to be an investor, to be a venture capitalist, you have to be sort of a serial athlete, but the sport keeps changing. So you constantly need to learn a new sport, because what do you know about kind of frontier labs and compute efficiency and what's inference? That's nothing that's ever been discussed before, right? So it's really a great question. So you have to be very curious. That's kind of one. When we interview, curiosity is one of the key attributes we interview for.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Omar from a fintech called Zeal. I just want to know, just to learn from your experience with all the boards you're on, what is, and if you can try to actually like dig deeper into the patterns you've seen with founders that are excelling across the different boards, what is a quality or something that does make a founder shine from your experience?
Yeah, what a great question too, around just founder attributes. Yeah. I mean, there's a few, I think, if I have to, I think is real sense of urgency, because just, tomorrow's not waiting for everyone. An ability to join dots and have an insight on the industry that is like a bit of a aha. You get out of the meeting, you're like, I've never thought about solving that problem this way. I never knew that was such a problem. So there's kind of a depth of understanding on an approach that truly is novel. I think it's very important to be able to tell a story, because if you don't tell a story, forget about the capital, because when there's a lot of capital, that can happen, but not the next capital, but it's about the team. You cannot get a AAA team. And at the end, recruiting people, keeping people, I mean, TS is master at this, and you just saw him on stage, is absolutely essential to kind of actually perform. You can have a great idea, a great insight, you can have capital, you can even build a product, but at the end, it really doesn't matter, right? As we said, it's a kind of up to a 15-year journey. So these are the three of the very obvious ones where we really try to look out for them, and I think the sense of urgency one, again, is very obvious, but you can see when someone's at the edge of the table and they kind of want to keep going, and it has to be done today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we always, as journalists, it's the same thing. I mean, if somebody can tell us a story, they're going to write about them. Otherwise,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you have the same issue. Yeah.
Hi, Sonali. This is great. One question. A couple of weeks ago, Mark and Jason made the comments that AI is coming for everyone's job except venture capitalists. Do you agree, and do you think your job is safe?
Actually, so we just did a demo of a company that I won't mention that does all the, and I just heard this other stat today that I think is really interesting, is that kind of the very early analysis, kind of the data gathering, the competitor benchmarking, kind of who's raised what, what's the industry, what's the news, like the very basic stuff that just takes a bit of time and probably somebody somewhere has to do. So not kind of the person writing the check, because we're very special. I'm just kidding. But I think there is a lot of, there was a stat that said the unemployment rate for recent graduates is much higher since AI, and maybe you guys are nodding, you know this as much as I do, because a lot of the work that at least I did when I started, in kind of 95 in New York, in tech banking, was just like data gathering and aggregation, and that now is done by ChatGPT. So I do think that there will be elements of even our job, of spotting, of scoring, which will be automated. Workflows are being automated. I don't know. I mean, everything's going to be possible, right? We're going to be kind of going to other planets. So I can't imagine that we can say that we won't be. I won't be around, so I don't really care. Yeah.
this is why I love audience questions, though. I love that question. You asked the things we should have asked. Yeah.
Oh, question. I'm like one of the youngest people here, so. Sorry. I'm like a 19-year-old who's just like curious about all these investments, all of you cool people around here. I was just gonna ask, what are the main essential skills besides like prompt engineering, like learning coding or whatever, besides sales? What would be a skill that would be beneficial, like not just in one niche sector, but like throughout the entire like economical labor and like even like human capital? What would you say?
Yeah, no, first thing, I think it's great that you're here. It's also great that you're asking a question, by the way, because it can be intimidating. I think let's stay within the world of tech, because we're not going to talk about, being in healthcare, but within tech, I think one of the roles that you should strongly consider, and I think it's even more exciting today, is around product. Because product, you've got to figure out who's your customer, what does the product need to look like, is it going to delight, how do I price it, what are the competitors doing? And it's kind of it brings together marketing, engineering, customer centricity, competition, business strategy, all in one place. And then I say especially today, because if you look at all the kind of app development businesses out there, all the way from kind of the IDEs like Cursor, all the way to the Lovables and the Bolts, et cetera, is that the product teams now no longer are relying on their engineering, that they need engineering resources in order to hack something out, like prototyping is being done within product, and actually you can build full-fledged apps that you can experiment and, almost maybe not go into full production with, but sort of put in front of your customers. So I think the capabilities within product teams are super exciting right now, especially. So I would make a beeline for that. I see a few people nodding, so hopefully others agree.
Okay, I think we've got a couple more questions, and I don't want to keep you here all night. Well, I mean, I do, but.
Ollie Morgan from Vodafone. One of the things that the startups don't often understand, and I've seen my fellow VCs terrified just before they pitch to an LP. Could you give the audience a little bit more information about the world of limited partners, less probably problematic for yourselves? But certainly I've seen other fund managers really struggle at the moment being able to raise money from LPs, and just unpick that a little bit.
So just dealing with limited partners?
It's for the startups, LPs discuss.
Yeah, so we've actually been around 42 years and 25 years. So we're very lucky that we have kind of long-term partners. But the first thing I would say is to talk to limited partners who understand the business, because there's a lot of people that kind of go in and out of tech when it's hot. I mean, if you're looking at Mike here, all those LPs that were in tech in 2000, I'm not sure, a lot of them left and then kind of came back maybe in time for the next bubble, because that. And so if you want LPs, you should, if you talk to people who are sophisticated, who understand that long-term rewards in tech are really some of the best, right? That's why they kind of sacrifice liquidity for return. By being in this asset class, they'll ask hard questions, but they understand the business. They also really understand emerging managers and why emerging managers have an angle. So, Forerunner at some point started as an emerging manager because she had a kind of a view. And so I find that clearly I have a biased view, but I think institutional investors who know the asset class, who are sophisticated, know that there's always a new idea. There's always a new set of entrepreneurs. And so there's sometimes new VCs who kind of, and we can have that debate about boutique and kind of platform. But assuming you're talking about kind of emerging managers, if they have an angle, they have a reason to exist, if they can attract entrepreneurs, that's all LPs care about, is can you attract entrepreneurs? And if you attract enough of them, maybe you'll get the outlier, because we're only in the outlier business. So I don't think it's that complicated. Easy for me to say.
Oh, Kevin, there's somebody, back there. We see your hand.
Thank you. Yes, so as someone who wants to be like a founder in the future, I've been to SF like a year ago, and the atmosphere is a bit more different than the UK. And I see a bit more founders from the UK like moving to the US. So I just wanted to ask, what can EU founders do to be more competitive than their US counterparts?
I think they are. I mean, candidly, if we look at, back to the comment I made, where really we live for our outlier businesses, whether that's companies like Spotify, Celonis, Snakes, Sierras. These are some of our big companies, Supercell that we sold. These founders, they look no different, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of our companies that sell to enterprises, they all move to the US because that's where the majority of the market is, that's where the standards get set. So from an enterprise perspective, you really do need to be in the US because kind of, 50, 60, 70 cents of every dollar on software is spent in one market, and it's much easier. So we don't think of it like that. We don't think of any difference in the founders. That's the reason we set up 25 years ago, that there's exceptional founders across all of Europe. And if you fund them with not just capital, but with the conviction they can really have a shot at kind of building these outstanding companies. And then over time, maybe if your end market is in the US, you move to the US. If your end market is in Europe or it's global, like Spotify, you can stay here too. So I think it's kind of horses for courses, but we don't see any difference. And our returns also tell very much the same story.
Well, Sonali, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Really appreciate it. Always great to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you also again to TS, if he has left or not left. And thank you, Nazo. So great to have you here. And thank you to Paladin. Thank you all for coming. And we've got more drinks and I think dessert too. So stick around. Thank you.